They told me I'd amount to nothing. Today they're sitting in my office, asking for my help. But we need to go back to understand how the family disappointment became the one person they couldn't afford to lose. I was 12 when I realized I'd never be good enough. My report card sat on the kitchen table, 6 A's and 1 B+ in advanced mathematics, and my mother didn't even look up from her phone. "Your cousin Jessica got straight A's again," she said, her voice flat, dismissive. "And she's in gifted programs. What happened to you?" What happened to me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that report card and shove it in her face, make her see me, really see me. But I already knew better. I'd learned that lesson at 8 years old when I won second place in the regional art competition and my father asked why I hadn't won first. There was always someone better, always someone more impressive, always a reason why my best wasn't enough. That's the thing about growing up in a family that measures love in achievements. You become addicted to a validation you'll never receive, constantly chasing a finish line that moves every time you get close. My older sister Emma was the golden child, the one who did everything right. Pre-med at an Ivy League school, internships at prestigious hospitals, a resume that made my parents' eyes light up at dinner parties. "Emma's going to be a surgeon," my mother would announce to anyone who'd listen, her chest puffing with pride. And then, almost as an afterthought, if someone was polite enough to ask, "Oh, and this is our other daughter," not even my name, just the other one, the spare, the backup plan that didn't pan out. I learned to make myself small in those moments, learned to smile through the comparisons, learned to swallow the shame that burned in my throat every time my accomplishments were measured against my sisters and found lacking. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't see past their narrow definition of success. I was dreaming bigger than they'd ever imagined for themselves. I wanted to be a filmmaker, not just someone who made videos, but someone who told stories that mattered, that moved people, that changed perspectives. I'd spent my teenage years devouring Criterion Collection films, teaching myself editing software, writing scripts in notebooks I hid under my bed. At 16, I saved up for months to buy a used camera, shooting short films with my friends, entering every festival I could find. When I won a Youth Filmmaker Award, I practically ran home, bursting through the door with the trophy in my hands. Finally something they'd have to acknowledge. My father glanced at it, then back to his laptop. "That's nice, honey. Very cute hobby. But you need to start thinking about real careers. What about accounting? Your uncle could get you an internship. A hobby. Years of passion, dedication, craft, dismissed as a hobby." The trophy went on a shelf in my room, gathering dust beside participation ribbons and honor roll certificates. Just another thing that didn't matter. College was supposed to be my escape, but they controlled the money, which meant they controlled my major. "We're not paying $50,000 a year for film school," my mother said, her arms crossed, her expression set in stone. "You'll study business or communications, something practical, and you can make your little movies on the side." So, I did. I enrolled in a communications program I had zero interest in, took classes that numbed my brain, and spent every free moment in the film lab, editing projects that would never be seen by anyone who mattered to me. My parents attended exactly one of my film screenings, arrived late, left early, and spent the drive home criticizing the parking situation. They never asked what the film was about. They never asked if I was proud of it. They never asked me anything except when I was going to get serious about my future. As if the future I was building wasn't serious, wasn't real, wasn't worth their time. The comparisons got worse as we got older. Emma graduated medical school. Emma got engaged to another doctor. Emma bought a house in the suburbs with a 3-car garage. And me? I graduated with a degree I didn't want, moved into a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, and took a soul-crushing marketing job to pay rent while I worked on my films at night. Every family gathering became a performance. My parents trotting out Emma's accomplishments like show ponies while I sat there, invisible, picking at my food and counting the minutes until I could leave. "When are you going to find a real career?" my father would ask, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer was never. "When are you going to settle down and do something with your life?" As if I wasn't doing something. As if the web series I'd created that was gaining a small but dedicated following didn't count. As if the freelance clients I was building didn't matter. As if I didn't exist at all unless I existed on their terms. But what really broke me, what pushed me past the point of no return, was my 27th birthday. I'd spent 3 years building a production company from nothing, working 16-hour days, landing bigger clients, making actual money doing what I loved. I'd just signed my first major contract, a documentary series with a streaming platform, the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed about since I was 16 years old, with that used camera and a head full of stories. I invited my family to dinner, not to celebrate my birthday really, but to share this news, this validation they couldn't possibly dismiss. I'd made it. I'd actually made it. My mother arrived 20 minutes late, complaining about traffic. My father spent the first 10 minutes on a work call. Emma squeezed in the dinner between hospital shifts, still in her scrubs, exhausted but glowing with that particular shine of someone whose life choices are universally approved. I waited until dessert to share my news, my hands shaking as I pulled up the contract on my phone. I have something exciting to tell everyone. I started, and my mother cut me off mid-sentence. Before you do, she said, reaching across the table to grab Emma's hand. Your sister has some news. Emma blushed, smiled, and held up her left hand where a diamond ring caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. The table erupted. My parents jumped up, hugging Emma, crying actual tears of joy, calling over the waiter to order champagne. My father pulled out his wallet, insisting on paying for the most expensive bottle they had. My mother was already on her phone, texting relatives, posting photos on Facebook, announcing her daughter's engagement to the world. And I just sat there, my phone still in my hand, my news still unspoken, my existence once again eclipsed by Emma's perfectly timed milestones. The waiter asked if I wanted anything else. I asked for the check, paid for my own meal, and left while they were still celebrating, still toasting, still completely unaware that I'd even gone. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the contract that was supposed to change everything, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. It didn't matter what I achieved. It didn't matter how successful I became. I would never be enough for them because the problem wasn't me. It was them. It was their inability to see value in anything that didn't fit their rigid, narrow definition of success. I'd spent my entire life performing for an audience that would never applaud, begging for crumbs of approval from people who'd rather starve me than admit they were wrong about who I could become. And I was done. I was so completely, utterly done. The next morning, I drafted an email. Short, simple, definitive. I told them I needed space to focus on my career and my mental health. I told them I wouldn't be attending family gatherings for the foreseeable future. I didn't accuse, didn't rage, didn't burn bridges. I just quietly, calmly stepped off the battlefield. Then I blocked their numbers, muted their social media, and made the hardest, scariest, most liberating decision of my life. I chose myself. For the first time in 27 years, I chose myself. The documentary series launched 3 months later. My phone stayed silent with the numbers that used to make me anxious. And for the first time since I was 12 years old, I started sleeping through the night. But walking away was just the beginning. The real question was whether I could actually build the life I'd always dreamed of, or if their voices in my head would prove them right after all. Would I finally become the person I was meant to be? Or would I remain forever the daughter who was never good enough? Even in my own mind, I deleted their contact information at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, my finger hovering over the confirm button for almost 10 minutes before I finally pressed it. The screen went blank. No more names, no more numbers, no more access to me, and for the first few days, I felt nothing but pure, crystalline relief. But here's what nobody tells you about cutting off your family. The silence is deafening, and in that silence, all their voices get louder. The first month was the hardest. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my chest tight with panic, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. What if they were right about me? What if I really was just a delusional kid with a camera and impossible dreams? What if this documentary series flopped and I ended up alone, broke, and proved them right about everything? These thoughts would spiral through my mind like poison, and I'd have to physically get out of bed, pace my apartment, remind myself why I'd made this choice. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, twice a week. You're grieving, she told me during our third session, and I almost laughed. They're not dead, I said. She looked at me with those calm, knowing eyes and replied, no, but the parents you wanted them to be are. You're mourning people who never existed. That hit differently. That hit so hard I couldn't speak for the rest of the session. Because she was right. I wasn't mourning my actual parents. I was mourning the fantasy parents I'd spent 27 years hoping would suddenly appear and see me, really see me, and tell me I was enough. But while I was doing the internal work, something else was happening. Something I hadn't anticipated. I was thriving. Without the constant weight of their disappointment crushing me. Without the anxiety of the next family gathering where I'd be compared and found wanting. Without the emotional energy I'd spent trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. I had space. Space to create. Space to breathe. Space to become the person I'd always been underneath their expectations. The documentary series premiered to incredible reviews. Critics called it raw and unflinching, a masterclass in intimate storytelling. The kind of work that reminds us why documentary filmmaking matters. My inbox exploded with opportunities, brands wanting to collaborate, studios interested in my next project, film festivals inviting me to speak. And the best part? None of it was for them. None of it needed their approval. I was building something real. Something mine. Something they could never take credit for, or diminish. 6 months after I'd cut contact, I landed my second major project. A documentary about second-generation immigrants redefining success outside their parents' expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me. I threw myself into the work, interviewing dozens of people who'd walked away from law school to become artists, quit medical residencies to start nonprofits, rejected family businesses to chase their own visions. And in every single interview, I saw myself. I saw the guilt, the fear, the liberation, the grief, the triumph. These people became my chosen family, my tribe, the ones who understood that sometimes love isn't enough. If it comes with conditions that destroy who you are. One of my subjects, a woman named Priya who'd left her family's engineering empire to become a playwright, told me something I'll never forget. They wanted me to be successful, she said, but only if that success looked exactly like what they'd imagined. The moment my success became my own, it stopped counting. That quote became the thesis of the entire documentary. The project took 8 months to complete. And during that time, I started noticing something strange. Extended family members began reaching out. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years sent a Facebook friend request. A cousin messaged me asking how I was doing. My sister Emma called from a number I didn't have blocked, and when I answered out of shock, she said, "Mom and Dad are asking about you." I felt my stomach drop. "What did you tell them?" I asked. Emma sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I told them you're doing well. Really well. I saw your documentary got nominated for an award. Congratulations, by the way." The line went quiet for a moment, then she added, "They've been watching your work, you know. They won't admit it, but I've seen Dad's search history. I think they're realizing they made a mistake." I wanted to feel victorious. I wanted to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt nothing. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, and I hung up. Because here's the thing about finally building your self-worth. You stop needing the people who tried to destroy it to validate what you've become. But the universe wasn't done testing me. 3 months later, my documentary about immigrant children premiered at Sundance Film Festival. It won the Audience Award and got picked up for distribution by one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world. My face was suddenly everywhere. Interviews in major publications, podcast appearances, industry events where people actually knew my name. And that's when things got complicated. My phone, the one with the blocked numbers, started receiving calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Voice messages from family, friends, emails forwarded through my business website. All of them variations of the same message. "Your parents would love to reconnect. They're so proud of you. Family is important, you should reach out." The audacity was staggering. Now they were proud? Now, after I'd done exactly what they told me would lead to failure, after I'd built success on my own terms without their support, now they wanted to claim me. I deleted every message, every single one. Then the guilt started creeping in. Because of course it did. My therapist warned me this would happen. "Success doesn't erase the programming," Dr. Chen said. "You've spent your entire life believing you owe them something. That conditioning doesn't disappear just because you've achieved external validation." She was right. But knowing that intellectually didn't stop the 3 a.m. thoughts. What if my father got sick and I never spoke to him again? What if my mother died and my last memory was walking out of that birthday dinner? Was I being cruel? Was I punishing them? Or was I simply protecting the life I'd fought so hard to build? These questions haunted me. But what scared me more was the possibility that I'd built my entire new identity in reaction to them. Was my success actually mine, or was it still about proving them wrong? That thought kept me up more nights than I want to admit. The real test came 11 months after I'd cut contact. I was at an industry gala, celebrating the success of my documentary, when I ran into someone from my past, Marcus, my sister's fiancé, now husband. He approached me carefully, like I was a wild animal that might bolt. "Can we talk?" he asked, and something in his voice made me nod. We stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city, the noise of the party muffled behind us. "Emma misses you," he said. "Your parents, they're struggling. Your dad had a health scare last month. Nothing major, but it shook them. And your mom, she's been different, quieter. I think she's depressed." I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the crisis that would force me to choose between my boundaries and my guilt. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "But I can't go back to being their disappointment, Marcus. I can't go back to shrinking myself, so they feel comfortable." He nodded slowly. "They're not asking you to shrink. They're asking for a chance to know who you've become." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Could people really change? Could parents who'd spent decades dismissing me suddenly see me? Or was this just another manipulation? Another way to pull me back into a dynamic that nearly destroyed me? If you've ever walked away from toxic family, drop a comment below and let me know how you handled the guilt. Because that's the part nobody warns you about. The freedom comes with a price. And sometimes that price is carrying the weight of wondering if you made the right choice. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends, because trust me, the real confrontation is coming. I told Marcus I'd think about it. But thinking about it meant spiraling for weeks. My work suffered. I'd sit in editing sessions, unable to focus, my mind replaying every family memory, every moment of hurt, every missed birthday, and dismissed achievement. But I also remembered the peace I'd felt these past months. The freedom of living without constant criticism, the joy of creating without fear of judgment. Dr. Chen helped me reframe the question. "This isn't about whether you owe them forgiveness," she said. "It's about what serves your healing. What serves your peace. Not theirs. Yours." That perspective shift changed everything. Because I realized I'd been approaching this wrong. It wasn't about whether my parents deserved a second chance. It was about whether I wanted to give them one, and what boundaries would protect me if I did. My second documentary launched to even bigger success than the first. It was featured on the homepage of the streaming platform. Think pieces were written about it. I was invited to speak at TEU-style events. And with each achievement, I felt more solid in who I'd become, more certain that my worth wasn't up for debate. I wasn't the same person who'd left that birthday dinner broken and invisible. I was someone who'd walked through fire and come out forged in steel, unshakable, undeniable. Finally free. But freedom, I was learning, wasn't the absence of family. It was the presence of choice. And I was about to make a choice that would change everything. Because 2 weeks after that conversation with Marcus, I received an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "We need your help." It was from my father's email address, but I could tell my mother had written it. The message was brief, almost formal. They needed me. Not my forgiveness, not my presence at a family dinner. They needed my actual help. Something had happened, something they couldn't fix on their own. And apparently, I was the only person who could solve it. The tables had completely turned. The daughter they'd dismissed as a failure was now the only person with the resources, connections, and expertise to save them from whatever crisis they'd found themselves in. I sat there staring at the email for what felt like hours, my finger hovering over the delete button the same way it had hovered over the block button almost a year ago. But this time, I didn't press it. This time, I did something different. I called my therapist. I called my chosen family. I called every person who'd supported me through this journey and asked them the question that was tearing me apart. Do I help the people who never helped me? Do I extend grace to people who never extended it to me? Do I become who they never were, or do I protect my peace at all costs? And here's what terrified me most. Part of me, a small, wounded part that still lived somewhere in my chest, part of me wanted to help them. Not because I owed them, not because I'd forgiven them, but because maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to rewrite the story on my terms. The power had shifted. The disappointment had become the savior. The failure had become the success. And now I held all the cards. The question wasn't whether they deserved my help. The question was, who did I want to be with this power? Who had I become in the absence of their approval? And was I strong enough to face them again without losing myself in the process? Because revenge isn't always about making people suffer. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is becoming so completely, undeniably successful that the people who doubted you have no choice but to ask for your permission, your approval, your help, and then you get to decide whether they're worth your time. That moment was coming. That confrontation was inevitable. But first, I had to figure out who I was meeting them as. The wounded daughter still seeking validation, or the woman I'd become who no longer needed it. One thing was certain. When I finally faced my parents again, everything would change. The only question was whether I was ready for what came next. Would I use my power to help them and prove I was the bigger person? Or would I walk away again and protect the peace I'd fought so hard to build? What would you do if the people who told you you'd never succeed suddenly needed the success they said you'd never have? I scheduled the meeting for a Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop near my production office. Neutral territory where I held the advantage. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered my usual oat milk latte, and sat by the window watching people pass by, living their ordinary lives while I prepared for the conversation that would either close a chapter or reopen a wound I'd spent a year learning to heal. When my parents walked through the door, I almost didn't recognize them. My father looked smaller somehow, his shoulders curved in a way I'd never noticed before. My mother's hair had more gray, and she was wearing minimal makeup, which for her was practically a sign of surrender. They spotted me immediately, and the look on their faces was something I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. They were uncertain about me. The power dynamic had completely flipped, and we all felt it. They sat down across from me, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy, loaded with everything unsaid between us. Finally, my mother cleared her throat. "Thank you for meeting with us," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I know you didn't have to." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the moment stretch, refusing to make this easier for them the way I'd spent my entire childhood making things easier. "Your email said you needed help," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What's going on?" My father glanced at my mother, and something passed between them. Some wordless communication that couples develop after decades together. Then he looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in years. "Your sister's husband, Marcus, he invested a significant portion of our retirement savings into his medical practice expansion. The practice is failing. We stand to lose everything we've worked for. The house, our savings, everything." He paused, and I could see how much it cost him to say the next words. "You have connections in the business world now. Investors, consultants, people who could help turn this around, or at least minimize the damage. We need introductions. We need your network. We need you." The words hung in the air, and I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. They needed me. Actually needed me. Not needed me to fit into their box or meet their expectations, but needed the person I'd become despite them. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You're asking me to use the career you called a hobby, the connections I made in the industry you said wasn't real, to save the retirement you spent on my sister's family, the one you've always been proud of." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was simply stating facts. My father nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what we're asking. And we know we don't deserve it." Those last words caught me off guard. We know we don't deserve it. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an admission, an acknowledgement of the years of dismissal and comparison, and conditional love disguised as concern. I looked at these two people who'd shaped so much of my pain, who'd made me feel small and insufficient, and never quite right, and I realized something profound. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't need their approval anymore. And that freedom meant I could choose what happened next based on who I wanted to be, not who they'd made me feel I was. "I'll help you," I said, and I watched relief flood their faces. "But not because I owe you anything. Not because we're family. I'll help because I've built a life where I have the power to help people, and I choose to use that power, even when it's difficult." I paused, making sure they heard every word. "But there are conditions. First, we start therapy. Family therapy. if we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward. Second, you never, ever compare me to Emma or anyone else again. Third, you acknowledge out loud, right now, that you were wrong about me and my choices. The coffee shop noise faded into background static as my parents sat with my terms. My mother was crying openly now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. We were wrong, she said, her voice breaking. We were so wrong about you. You've built something incredible, something we were too blind and stubborn to see. I've watched every documentary you've made. I've read every interview. And I've been so proud and so ashamed at the same time, because I know I have no right to be proud when I did everything I could to stop you from becoming exactly who you are. My father reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine but not touching, respecting the boundary. I told you you'd fail, he said. I told you to get a real job. I told you your dreams were impractical. And you proved me wrong about everything. You didn't just succeed, you thrived. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry for making you feel like you were never enough when the truth is, we were never enough for you. Something inside me that had been clenched tight for 28 years finally loosened. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined, where I'd unleash years of hurt and watch them suffer. This was quieter, sadder, more human. They were flawed people who damaged me with their limitations. And I was a person who'd survived that damage and chosen to become someone different. I spent the next 2 hours connecting my father with 3 business consultants I knew, including one who specialized in medical practice turnarounds. I drafted emails, made phone calls, leveraged relationships I'd built through my own work and credibility. And as I did, I watched my parents watch me, really see me for the first time, competent, connected, capable, everything they'd told me I'd never be. When we finally stood to leave, my mother hugged me, and I let her. But I didn't melt into it the way I would have as a child desperate for affection. I accepted it, but I didn't need it. That was the difference. Over the following months, we started family therapy. It was uncomfortable and painful and necessary. My parents had to confront the ways they'd prioritized appearance over authenticity, achievement over acceptance. I had to confront the ways I'd made my entire identity about proving them wrong, how I'd let their voices live in my head, long after I'd blocked their numbers. We talked about Emma, who it turned out had been struggling with the pressure of being the golden child, carrying the weight of their expectations while watching me find freedom and walking away. The practice situation resolved better than expected. My connections helped restructure the debt and bring in new investors. My parents didn't lose everything, but they came close enough to learn something valuable about who they could depend on and why. Here's what I learned about revenge. The sweetest kind isn't about making people suffer. It's about becoming so completely yourself that their opinions become irrelevant. It's about building a life so full and real and yours that whether they approve becomes the smallest, most insignificant question. Did I help my parents? Yes. Did they deserve it? That's not for me to answer. I helped them because I could, because I wanted to be the kind of person who extends grace even when it wasn't extended to me. But I didn't help them to earn their love or prove my worth. I helped them because my worth was never in question. Not anymore. Not to the only person whose opinion actually mattered. Me. The relationship with my parents now is complicated, boundaried, and honest. They're learning to celebrate me as I am. I'm learning to accept them as they are. We're building something new from the rubble of what was broken. And some days that feels like healing. And some days it just feels like coexistence. And both are okay. So here's my question for you. And I really want to know because your story matters just as much as mine. Have you ever had to choose between proving someone wrong and proving yourself right? Have you ever walked away from people who couldn't see your worth? Or are you still trying to earn approval that might never come? Drop your story in the comments below. Because I guarantee someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know they're not alone in carrying this specific kind of pain. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the family disappointment who became the family success, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams matter even when their family can't see it yet. Because the best revenge isn't about them seeing you succeed. It's about you succeeding so completely that whether they see it stops mattering at all. That's freedom. That's the real victory. That's how you win.